How have you felt when someone you know told you that you are ugly? Obviously, you might have been angry.
Not only that, but even in my childhood, that had been forwarded to me. I'd been made to believe that I was ugly, I was unworthy, I was a problem.
But this woman here was not only told to be ugly.
I totally believed that I was so ugly that sometimes even when I walked in town, I never looked myself in the mirror except once.
She was made to actually believe it.
Once in a while, I would accidentally look at the windows and I would see myself there and I would see a monster, a very ugly person looking up at me, looking back to me, because I believed it in my mind.
From her dubious childhood to her struggle to get married, this woman has seen it all.
The first marriage, the man maintained that I was so ugly, he was doing me a favor of being married to me. And so I believed it because it's something he told me day in and day out.
At one point, her children took charge of her search for a new husband, and you can call it a miracle. But she got a man who committed to marry her even before they met. And you'll be surprised to learn why this wealthy man took such a big decision and why the decision itself was dubbed stupid by this same woman. This is her story.
So hapa ni mtaa yako. This is a place.
This road is where I used to pass with smuggled salt to go to Uganda. Uganda is not far from here.
What do you mean when you say smuggled salt?
You carry salt because they don't pass through customs. You pass through the shortcuts. So ideally, we are not paying duty.
Oh.
Taxes. My names are Ada Doibele, ni Ada.
Ada Dobele was born in Busia region in Kenya, which was very close to the border with Uganda. Her life was full of misery as her father abandoned her and her mother pretty early, and the struggle to survive for both of them was impeccably difficult. Her mother used to work an enormous amount of hours but gained only a fraction of money that could not help her family to survive. As a result, at only 15 years of age, Ada entered the labor market after finishing secondary school in a bid to help her mother and contribute something at home.
I grew up as a neglected child, and so I began to get involved in a business at a very early age because my deepest desire as a child was to please my mother. I wanted desperately to please my mother. So by indulging in business at such an early age, I hoped that I would make money, lots of money, and just make him happy, take over all her financial responsibilities.
Ada had entered into the fish business when she was just 12 years old, back when she was still a student. It was a tough life since she had to go to school early in the morning and sell her fish later in the afternoon, where she had to sleep early to be able to go to school again. It was a vicious cycle to the young Ada with her struggling mom. And as soon as she was done with secondary school, which she finished earlier than most students at 15 years old, she was engaged into fish business full-time. And she started to go to Uganda to import them, roast them herself, and sold them on the street. Her business boomed for a few months, and she started to export salt to Uganda as she was going to import fish. But then as she was getting used to her new world, something dangerous happened, as she was raped by a man who became her husband.
And at 15, the age of 15, I was married off. Now, thankfully, of course, I began school in Standard 2. So at the age of 15, I was just completing my high school, that's Form 4. So I was married off, and of course, my first experience in this relationship was rape. So I ended up, and of course, I was the third wife at that time. So I ended up having 3 children in this relationship. But then, when I turned 22, I walked away. I walked away because it was so abusive. It was I would be abused by both the man and his first wife. So it became so intense, and at some point I made up my mind to leave. And so I left with my 3 children.
Ada met a new handsome man and married him. He was a young man who was yet to marry any woman, but his behavior was unbreakable since he was always drunk and abusive as well. He was also as young as Ada, who was still in her early 20s, despite the fact that she had 3 children. Her second husband started to mistreat her children and doubled down on his abuse towards Ada. Meanwhile, the marriage produced 4 children in total, which meant that Ada had 7 children, including 3 girls and 4 boys. But her second husband increased his abuses and beatings to the point Ada couldn't believe it, as she started to fear for her life. The man told her how much she's ugly and that she has benefited him since she joined their marriage with 3 children. Since she was young, Ada was used to being told that she was incredibly ugly. In her first marriage, her husband made this his own motto to remind his wife that she was so ugly and could never find a man who is willing to marry her with her ugly look. Out of nowhere, the same statement sneaked into Ada's second marriage, as her second husband started to verbally abuse her using the same ugliness narrative. The result was a deep trauma suffered by Ada, who came to believe that maybe, just like her husband's told, maybe she might be truly ugly and not worth going out in public.
The first marriage, the man maintained that I was so ugly, he was doing me a favor of being married to me. And so I believed it because it's something he told me day in and day out. And 7 years of being told the same thing, you tend to believe. Not only that, but even in my childhood, that had been forwarded to me. I'd been made to believe that I was ugly, I was unworthy, I was a problem. And so when this man began to do that, I believed him, of course. And he was just emphasizing a fact that had been revealed to me. So when I got married to this second man, and when I say marriage, it's not a real marriage like in African context that maybe you are paid dowry for or that you got for a wedding. It was this thing of come we stay. It's quite common here in Kenya. And so he picked up from where the last one had left, both in abuse. When I talk about abuse, I'm talking about intense beatings, intense insults, emotionally, physically, name it. So after 14 years.
When Ada left her second marriage, she went to live alone with her children, of whom some of them were in their late teens and early 20s. Her children saw how she struggled alone and decided to look for a new husband for her. They have seen their mother being abused and beaten by her husband, and they didn't want her to keep enduring such terrible beatings and sufferings. The children were also very scared of their fathers, given how they were also being abused when their mother was still in marriages. So the easiest answer was that children took charge of their mother and vowed to help her find a loving husband who would treat them well.
My children first began to suggest to me that they want to find me a husband. And I believe the reason why they did that was because they were afraid, because they had watched me battered by this man. It used to get so bad. Twice he put the house on fire, intending to actually get us killed. And so they realized that I may end up dead.
I did more or less as a joke, but my friend kept encouraging me, telling me that I have nothing to fear. If I'm lucky enough, I would find a husband. If not, then I would continue to raise my children as I was doing it.
I was online for about maybe 3 months before I met someone. 3 months, I met another person, I left the other one. So when I found the third person, he became very serious with me. He wanted to come to Kenya to visit me. He wanted marriage actually. But then he was so concerned about my children, and I had a problem with that because I didn't intend to go back to a relationship where I would be blamed for having children, because I love my children and I am happy, I'm proud of them. I have no problem having 7 children. Even before I continue, I must say that my life has been a miracle, because I've watched God work in my life tremendously, just amazingly. And so on this 21st day of December 2011, I asked God very simply, God, if there's someone out there that can love me as I am with my burden, please make them find me. That was on 21st of December 2011. And guess what? The Lord prompted me. I was prompted to resubscribe because I'd since left the dating site because I'd met somebody, or so I thought. I resubscribed, and on 24th, I met my now late husband.
Ada, who was so surprised by this man to the point she felt that maybe he was motivated by evil spirits, or that maybe he was a scammer who was looking for other benefits. She wondered how a healthy and relatively wealthy man was willing to marry a woman with 7 children whose fathers are different. She wondered a lot of questions. The man was a man of God. He loved God and prayed quite a lot. This motivated Ada also to pray even more, as his husband always told her to do so.
And he's the most wonderful person I've ever met in life. Actually, this man taught me, he made me grow so close to God. I could see Jesus in him. You know, the true God's love. He was so genuine, he was so true, he was so humble, he was so loving, he was so kind. He was a patient person. This is a man who never insulted me in the 10.5 years that we lived together. Yeah, never. So after I met him, then now he began to ask me about my childhood. Then of course I realized that I had never spoken to anybody about how I grew up and about my life generally, because I never used to tell people that I was in an abusive relationship, except for my neighbors who knew, of course. And so he began to ask me, and I would start narrating to him, and I would break down and just start sobbing, because I realized that it was very painful. Apparently I had so much pain in me that I didn't know. So soon after I had finished speaking to him, that's when the Lord gave me, one morning I was told that it's time for your book. And of course I began thinking to myself, how can I write a book? But interestingly, my son had bought me an iPad the previous December. This was on April 20th of 2005. That's my first book about my testimony. The name of the book is Adornment 1. The Lord would later make me write Adornment 2, the next part of my testimony, after receiving God and so on. And so then the Lord now began to give us the vision of this place. The Lord gave us a ministry. He called it himself, the name Adornment again. And then I discovered that adornment actually is very significant in my life. We've heard that the Lord says that before I formed you in your mother's womb, I knew you. Before you were born, I set you apart. It is so true.
As the couple had entered into their marriage, it became clear that their passion for Jesus was huge, and they both started to engage in missionaries and other activities that promoted Jesus. But as she was living with her white husband, neighbors and friends started to wonder how she managed to find a good husband, and some of her friends chose to never speak to her again.
There's a lady who was supposedly my friend.
Rumors started to spread that she uses evil spirits, and one day one of her best friends invited her and asked her if she uses evil spirits. It was a shocking experience for Ada because of the fact that her friends were the ones promoting such rumors.
In fact, there's a sister. She actually called me aside and she told me, she bought me tea in town, and she was asking me, please just be honest with me, because we all know that you must have a witch doctor somewhere who has made this possible for you. Mm-hmm. I was shocked.
Her husband reversed everything Ada had been told since she was a child and started to tell her how she's very beautiful. It took a while for Ada to believe it, since the state of her ugliness had been told her for quite a long time. When they were working together as a couple, Ada would refuse to go together with her husband, thinking it would be embarrassing to him, as she thought herself was an ugly person. But her husband kept his motivations to her. She came to realize that she wasn't ugly as other people used to tell her, and her confidence started to recover slowly. The couple then started an evangelical ministry named Joppa House of Worship, and they started to preach the gospel in Kenya. Her husband had stopped his job and employed his full-time efforts into the evangelical ministry. However, one day, his husband returned back to Germany and got sick. He reported to his wife, and the two thought the problem was easier. as they mistook his sickness to COVID-19, which was savaging Europe at a staggering speed. They neglected the disease until it was even more complicated, and when the man finally went to the hospital, they discovered that it was malaria. Doctors tried their very best, but it wasn't possible anymore, and thus her husband succumbed to it. His death was a deep blow to Ada, since their projects were yet to take shape. But she had vowed to continue them until when they are fulfilled, even though it's not easy. This man had wished to be buried in Kenya, so when he was dead, Ada flew to Germany to sign the papers that he would be brought to be buried in Kenya. Ada's ministry is still working, but it's no longer the same, even if she's devoting all her efforts to sustain it. Her business had collapsed, though mainly because of restrictions that were instigated by the COVID-19 outbreak.
And I'm thankful for that. So ministry is a little bit hard right now, but I know that God is faithful, and I know that He's providing, So we also have a YouTube channel where we share, we sing Adornment Ministries, and we also have Joppa House of Worship. Yeah, and I also have a personal email address, of course, at adoibele@gmail.com.
Thank you for watching. I'm Elijah, and this is Afrimax English. Remember to subscribe.